Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another live stream here with Empty Cloud Monastery. This evening, we were planning to have another Dhamma talk by Ajahn Punnadhammo in his series on dependent origination. However, he seems to be having some kind of internet trouble today. So in his stead, I'll be giving a talk on the subject. So we'll start with doing a few minutes of meditation practice. So you can begin with getting in a meditation posture, whatever kind of meditation posture you like to use. So taking a minute to adjust your position, making sure that you're sitting up with a straight back, the head balanced evenly on the top of the spine, hands resting in your lap with the thumbs lightly touching. And take a few long, slow, deep breaths. With each breath, letting your body and mind relax. And then when you're feeling relaxed, then begin directing attention to your body, settling the mind at any point in the body. So choosing a place to center your attention, such as your hands or your abdomen or your torso. And focusing the mind there while maintaining a broad, open awareness, encapsulating your whole body in all the sense domains. So the mind is centered and still, yet open and inclusive. And keep sharpening the mind, intensifying and clarifying your attention with each moment. Feeling the body more and more strongly and clearly with every moment. And really enjoying this intensity and clarity of attention. Enjoying the experience of your own body. So clearly observing every moment of sensation, perceiving it as pleasant, fascinating. And if you begin to feel the first tingling sparks of euphoria in the body, let that euphoria grow. Let it magnify as your attention and stillness grow moment by moment. Let the euphoria grow as well. These three traits, attention, stillness, and euphoria, are interrelated, mutually supporting. So let them grow together, supporting each other, magnifying each other. Attention, stillness, and euphoria. Keep building up attention, euphoria, and stillness. Letting these three qualities build through mindfulness of the body. So you can slowly adjust your posture. Relaxing out of the meditation. Just taking a moment to enjoy the peacefulness of the mind. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddhas of past, present, and future. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Okay, good evening, friends. As mentioned, tonight was scheduled to be a talk about dependent origination with Ajahn Punnadhammo, but unfortunately, it seems he was unable to join us this evening. So instead, I'll be giving the talk. And I think it's appropriate to keep on the same topic, so talking about paticca samuppada. And I'd particularly like to emphasize some of the practical applications of paticca samuppada. So often when we talk about doctrinal concepts like this, often there's a tendency to approach it purely as a scholarly exercise, a thought game, an intellectual procedure. And to lose sight of the fact that the Buddha taught all these Dhamma concepts so that we could attain awakening. So the purpose of these concepts is to help us attain awakening. They're not just meant to be a description of things or a way of thinking about reality or anything like that. They're meant to be practical tools that help us to clear our mind of defilements, to eliminate our underlying tendencies towards unwholesome behaviors, meant to help us develop wisdom, wisdom which knows and sees things as they really are, and to help us reduce our suffering and eventually to transcend suffering entirely. So it's the same with paticca samuppada, commonly translated as dependent origination or conditional co-arising or other ways of translating. Paticca samuppada also, it's meant to be a practical set of tools for attaining awakening. And when talking about the practical application of paticca samuppada, there tends to be a lot of focus put on one particular section. So that particular section is Vedana Paccaya Tanha. So from feelings arise craving. So a lot of emphasis tends to be placed on that section, as it's said that this is the easiest place where one can get involved in the conditional process and turn it from suffering and delusion towards serenity and insight. However, my understanding is that the whole process of paticca samuppada offers many, many opportunities, many angles of practice, which can lead towards a turning away from suffering, turning away from dukkha and delusion, and a turning towards happiness and serenity and wisdom. So just starting with the very first part, avijja paccaya sankhara. So it's starting from avijja, starting from ignorance. So ignorance of right view, basically. ignorance of the way things are. So we combat this through developing right view. We combat avijja through reading the suttas, through discussing the suttas with senior teachers, through deeply contemplating the meaning of the suttas. This helps to weaken avijja. And through attempting to observe personally in our daily lives the truth of what the Buddha taught, the truth of what the Buddha spoke about. Through personally observing the Four Noble Truths, personally observing causality, personally observing the benefits of morality and concentration, then we start to weaken avijja. And if you weaken the root cause of the whole process, then the whole process then also starts to lose its power. Its power is diminished. So first off, don't reject the value of striking directly at the root of the problem. Of course, our ability to attack avijja is limited to some degree by how well progressed our practice is. So if everything else in our practice is weak, then of course it's going to be challenging to directly assault avijja. We can only reduce it to a certain degree through cultivating right view. But nonetheless, this is an important part of the process because right view is what makes it possible for us to progress along the path. So we cultivate right view in order to counteract avijja in the first place. But the next unfolding here, so avijja paccaya sankhara. So from ignorance, there arises the experience of sankharas, of manifold discrete objects. So from ignorance, there comes the experience of a universe as being composed of countless separate individual things. So physical objects as well as mental phenomena. Physical activities as well as mental activities. So all these things that we call things. So thing here meaning both a seemingly solid phenomenon as well as a process or an activity. But this step is unnecessary. Reality is what it is. Reality itself is a inseparably interrelated, interconditional mass. So to divide it up into discrete separate pieces is already a function of delusion. It's already a function of ignorance. So one way of practicing here then is to stop the mind from producing sankharas. Stop the mind from falling into its habitual activity of dividing reality up into discrete separate pieces. So this is the practice of anamitta samadhi. The practice of anamitta samadhi is to let go of all sankharas, to drop all phenomena immediately. And again, this is the practice which in the Chan schools is called silent illumination. So to immediately drop all sankharas, to immediately drop all phenomena. So in so doing, then the process of paticca samuppada grinds to a halt almost immediately before it's even got off the ground. So avijja paccaya, and it stops because we don't generate any sankharas. We aren't producing the concept or idea of separate objects, of distinctly discrete phenomena. So you can cut the chain, so to speak, right off the bat through practicing silent illumination, through practicing anamitta samadhi. The next unfolding is sankhara paccaya vijnana. So once we've generated the concept or the idea of discrete separate objects and activities, discrete phenomena, then there arises the experience of awareness of those discrete phenomena. So I am aware of those things out there. So this is the first arising of the self-identity construct, the self construct, which is built upon the experience of awareness of sankharas, consciousness of phenomena, consciousness of things and processes. But this also is an unnecessary addition. So you can let sankharas be sankharas, but without generating the sense of me observing those sankharas, me aware of those objects and activities. In vijnana paccaya namarupam. So once we have a sense of me observing things, then we further subdivide our sense of me into mind and body. And this also is an unnecessary activity. Mind and body are inseparable. They're not actually different things. They're not separable from each other. What we call body is simply an aspect of our mind. What we call body is simply a set of mental impressions. So to subdivide our experience into body and mind is already, again, a process of delusion. So you don't necessarily need to go down that route. You don't need to go down the route of separating body and mind. So this is another place where you can stop the unfolding of the process. So staying in the experience of mind without getting lost in the separation between physical and mental. Namarupa paccaya salayatanang. So once there's the experience of a body and mind, then we tend to start dividing up our experience into 6 distinct sensory domains. So sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. But this also is unnecessary. Again, through the practice of silent illumination meditation, it's quite clear that these 6 sensory domains are actually one sensory domain. There are not 6 domains, there's only one. We talk about 6 domains because that's a convenient way of talking. But in reality, the 6 sensory domains are actually just the domain of sensation, the domain of awareness. All of it is through the mind door. All of it is mind awareness. All of it is mental domain. So we can stop it there as well. So not subdividing our experience into 6 separate sensory domains, but allowing all the sensory domains to be perceived as a unity, as a complete whole. And this also interrupts the process from further developing. The next major step, salayatana paccaya paso. So once we've divided our experience up into these 6 sensory domains, then the next unfolding is the experience of sensory contact. Again, we have a sense that, well, there's a domain of sight, and then we see something. We're looking at things. So you can see how there's an unfolding here. First, we divide reality up into discrete things. Then we form the sense of, well, I am aware of those discrete things. Then we form the idea of like, well, I have a body and a mind, and I have 6 senses in these body and mind, and I am seeing things through the eyes and hearing things through the ears and smelling things through the nose and so on. So there's a development of complexity out of that which is inherently simple. So it's an unnecessary complexifying of a fundamentally simple reality. So this is the process that we're seeing unfold here. So with there being a sense domain and a sensory contact, we're also creating a sense of division. That the eye is over here and the sight is over there. And there's a sensory experience which is happening because of this sensory organ here, which is separate from that sensation producing object over there. So it's generating this further unnecessary complication. What in Pali we call papancha. Papancha is complication, proliferation, the unnecessary complexifying of things. So recognizing that that's what's going on, you can drop the process right there. So stopping at the place of sensory domain and not generating the experience of a separation between the sensory organ and the object of sensation. But usually at this point, things are already spiraling rapidly out of control. So it's getting increasingly difficult to maintain ourselves. But once again, at any point here, you can practice relinquishing phenomena. So as soon as you notice you're engaging in the sensory process, the process of sense contact, you can immediately drop that. Drop the concept of separation between sensory organ and sensory object. So letting go of the concept, the experience of sensory contact. And you can stop the process right there as well. The next unfolding, pasapachya vedana. So from sensory contact, there arises feeling. And once again, this is not necessary. So sensory contact itself is simply information. Again, if you smell something, well, that's just a smell. It's just fragrance. It's not inherently good or bad. It's not inherently pleasant or unpleasant. It's just olfactory information. So information coming in through your nose, through your sense of smell. The production of the experience of pleasure or pain or neutrality arises from our defilements, from our preferences. And this is one of the critical distinctions between an unawakened being and an awakened being. So for an unawakened being, the process of pleasure and pain seems automatic. You smell something and it's disgusting, or you smell something and it smells wonderful, or you smell something and you don't have any reaction to it. So it seems automatic. But actually, that's a subconscious process of desire and aversion happening. For an awakened being, there's a recognition that smell is just smell, and that pleasure and pain is something extra that we can choose to add, but which is not necessary. It's optional. So we find this spoken about, for example, in the famous Bahya Sutta. In the Bahya Sutta, the non-Buddhist contemplative, so there was a meditator who was not Buddhist, but had been practicing another kind of meditation, came to the Buddha and asked for a brief instruction. And the Buddha gives him a very brief instruction. The central part of it being, he says, let the scene, in the scene, let there be just the scene. In the herd, let there just be the herd. In the sensed, let there be just the sensed. In the cognized, let there be just the cognized. And in this way, there will be no you here or there or anywhere. And just this is the end of suffering. So the Buddha gives this very brief statement, and I've paraphrased it slightly. So if you want the full version, you can look up the Bahya Sutta. Again, very famous sutta and very commonly taught from. But in this, the Buddha is talking about the fact that we don't actually need to let sensation develop beyond sensation. In the scene, let there be just the scene. In the herd, let there just be just the herd, and so on. In other words, when you hear something, well, you don't need to add to that liking or disliking. You don't need to add on to it the concept of pleasant or unpleasant. It's just hearing, that's all. And in that hearing, you can recognize that hearing is just a conditional process. It's a causal arising. It's not me, it's not mine. It's just a function of the natural world. So in this way, there is no me here or there or anywhere. So the Buddha here is also talking not just about letting go of pleasant and unpleasant, but he's also talking about letting go of the sense of self. And this is pointing also to the fact that our preference, our reactions of liking and disliking are deeply rooted in our self-identity. It's like, well, I am the person who likes roses and doesn't like daffodils, for example. I actually like pretty much all flowers, so this doesn't apply to me. But maybe you're someone who likes roses but not daffodils. Well, then we form an identity. It's like, well, I am a person who likes roses. I am a person who dislikes daffodils. That's a self-identity that we form. And then we hold to that self-identity because we think that's part of what defines us. We think it's part of our uniqueness and specialness. And the thing that we cling to more than anything else in the entire universe is our self-identity. It's the one thing that we're most loath to let go of, most loath to relinquish. And yet it's also the source of all of our suffering. So the Bahia Sutta is pointing to this. In the seen, let there be just the seen. In the heard, let there be just the heard, and so on for each of the sensory domains. So not adding on to any sensory information, not adding on pleasure or pain, not adding on liking or disliking, not adding on preference. And this is also reflected in the classic Chan poem, the Xin Xin Ming. The first line of it says, "The way is easy for one who has no preferences." So this is also pointing once again to the fact that if you relinquish preference, then ultimately what you're doing is you're undercutting desire and aversion. And when you undercut desire and aversion, then the Vedana never arises. There's no experience of pleasure or pain. And this is critical because the next step of dependent origination is Vedana Paccaya Tanha. So dependent upon feeling, there is craving. So once you have pleasure, you crave pleasure. Once you have pain, you crave avoiding pain. You crave getting away from pain. So if you can stop the arising of Vedana, then you will not have craving. And if you have no craving, then you have no suffering. This is reflected in the Four Noble Truths. The third noble truth is, with the cessation of craving, there is the cessation of suffering. So tanha nirodha, dukkha nirodho. It's very simple. In theory, of course. In actual practice, it's always much more difficult than in theory. But the theory here is quite simple. If you have no craving, then you have no suffering. Well, the question then is, well, how do you not have any craving? Well, in dependent origination, we have a very direct route to not have craving. Have no Vedana. In the cessation form of Paticca Samuppada, the Buddha says, Vedana nirodha, tanha nirodho. So when there's no Vedana, then there's no craving. So recognizing once again that if you can stop the sensory process at contact, so just letting contact be contact, letting sensory contact just be information with no pleasure or pain concept added to that information, then that will prevent any craving from arising at all, which means no dukkha will arise. Then, of course, we come to the classic one of, again, Vedana Paccaya Tanha, where most teachers fixate. So I'm not going to say much on this point. Suffice to say that once pleasure arises, try to recognize it as being just a conditionally arisen phenomenon, something impermanent and ultimately unsatisfying, and therefore not worth wanting, not worth desiring. When pain arises, see it in the same way. A temporary conditional phenomenon, which is not worth being bothered by, because that's all it is, temporary and conditional. It's not who we are. It doesn't control us. The next step, tanha paccaya upadana. So dependent on craving, there is clinging or grasping. So upadana literally means holding close or bringing close. So it has both the sense of holding on to something, but it also has the sense of trying to reach out to grab something and bring it in. So once we figure out what we like and what we want, then we try to hold on to it. So this is upadana. Upadana is trying to hold on to what we have. So trying to hold on to the pleasant experiences, or trying to hold on to the minimal pain that we have. But the nature of all things is that they're constantly changing. So you can't maintain any experience. So this is another thing you can do, is you can recognize. So when you're wanting something, when you're craving something, you can recognize that whatever it is you're craving is something you cannot hold on to. And actually, the Buddha says that it's impossible to grasp anything. Nothing whatsoever can be grasped. Nothing whatsoever can be settled on or stuck on. So we relinquish whatever it is we're craving. And we cultivate the willingness to let it go. We cultivate disenchantment towards it, recognizing that it's an ultimately impermanent and unsatisfying experience. And that therefore it's not worth trying to hold on to. And that also ultimately it cannot be held on to. And nothing whatsoever can be held on to. So we recognize the futility of the grasping process. But again, we tend to just ride along with the process. So usually we fall into the next step, upadana paccaya bhavo. So from clinging, grasping, there is bhava. So bhava literally means existence. So it's literal meaning. But its apparent meaning here seems to be ego or self-identity. So this is when we have a full-fledged sense of ego, a full-fledged sense of self-identity, of who we think we are. So self-being. So who am I? Well, I'm the person who really doesn't want to let go of the things that I like, which are whatever it is I've been liking and craving and grasping in the previous steps. So our self-identity, once again, is very much rooted around what we like, what we crave, and what we don't want to let go of, what we're clinging to, what we grasp at. So this also is a place where you can cut the process. So when you recognize the grasping and clinging is happening, when you see that process occurring, then you can say, well, I don't want to be that kind of person. I don't want to be the kind of person who's clinging and grasping. And I especially don't want to be clinging and grasping to such silly, impermanent, unsatisfying things. And I certainly don't want to be forming a sense of self-identity around a process which causes suffering. So we can interrupt the process in this way. You can also interrupt it at this point by cultivating the perception of anatta, of not self, of recognizing that everything that's happening, so the eye that's seeing is not me. The thing that's being seen is not me. The process of sensory contact is not me. The feeling that's arising is not me. The craving for that feeling is not me. The clinging to that feeling is also not me. So in this way, recognizing all of it is not me, then one can prevent the formation of an ego, a self-identity from all of that. However, once we get to the point of a fully fledged sense of self-identity, then it's quite difficult to stop the manifestation of the consequences. So the consequences are birth, decay, death, sorrow, pain, grief, anguish, despair, and so on. This whole mass of suffering. So we have many, many opportunities building up to this. And I was particularly emphasizing through this in the beginning stages of the chain, emphasizing silent illumination practice as a very direct way of preventing paticca samuppada from taking hold in the mind. Once things have already fully developed, then it's useful to practice things like the perception of impermanence and the perception of not self. Those are what tend to be more effective at cutting through the process once it's fully blown, once it's manifested fully into the craving, grasping, and self-identity stages. So tanha, upadana, and bhava. Once it's into that stage of the process, then usually silent illumination is going to be a little too subtle. And we need to use more forceful techniques. So the perceptions of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, those contemplations and exercises are usually much more relevant to that stage. But really it's worth recognizing once again that we're constantly falling into the whole process of paticca samuppada over and over and over again every moment. So from the one perspective, that's quite depressing. It's like, well, I have all this information, but I seem to be failing to use it. But on the other hand, it's also a reminder that we constantly get another chance to try to apply the Buddha's teachings, to try to benefit from his instructions. So there's never a shortage of opportunities. Every single moment is an opportunity to break the cycle of craving, to weaken avijja, to try to get to the heart of the instructions on causality and conditionality. And again, not in an intellectual or philosophical sense, but in the direct experience of knowing how we can abandon our own suffering, knowing how we can eliminate the causes of our own suffering through a perceptual shift in how we're relating the arising of each moment, how we relate to each moment. So I think I'm going to stop at this point. I've said more than enough, I think. Again, I wasn't planning to give a talk this evening, so speaking off the cuff, I hope that this was of benefit to someone. So I'll go ahead and end at this time and take any questions that you might have. So let's see if there's any questions here. So stuff. Greetings from Ayasudhamma and Ayasavijana. Hello, Venerables. Welcome. Happy to see you joining in. Then we have Shadow of Label says, wish I could meditate with you guys, but my mind is racing from all this coffee. So you can still meditate even when your mind is racing. Just don't be bothered by the racing mind. Take no interest in the flow of thoughts. If you take no interest in the flow of thoughts, then they won't distract you from your meditation practice. I've actually had incredible meditation every now and then when I did have a very restless mind. So a lot of thoughts just seem to keep just blasting through the mind. And it was just this shift of just seeing it all as just meaningless, uninteresting noise. And the thoughts didn't go away. They were still there. But because I saw them as meaningless and uninteresting, then they did not distract me. In fact, they gave me a sense of energy, a sense of vivacity. So almost like it was lifting me up, a sense of mental power. And then with that attitude of viewing the thoughts as meaningless and uninteresting, then they faded into the background and ceased to be relevant. And after that, I was able to have very strong samadhi. So I've had this experience on many, many occasions. So actually, if your mind is racing, that can sometimes be a really wonderful starting point for meditation practice. Then Anita says, can you please repeat the Chan poem? So the poem is called the Xin Xin Ming. So I'll type that into the chat. It's an ancient Chan poem. You can find many translations of it online. So I recommend looking up some of those different translations. Or if you read ancient Chinese, you can also just read the original form in ancient Chinese. But it's one of these relatively short and often quoted Chan poems that gives a really beautiful summary of Buddhist practice. So next, Piyal and Indira say, how will silent illumination, so not elimination, though that's quite cute. Silent illumination. How will silent illumination / animitta samadhi get rid of sankharas? My understanding is that as long as you have asavas, sankharas can pop up. So what you're doing is you're stopping the mind from generating any perception of objects or any separate processes. So this is a way of, by dropping all objects, you can come to a direct perception of emptiness. So, and in dropping all objects, you also drop your basis for self-identity. So our self-identity is based upon sankharas. So by dropping all sankharas, you drop your self-identity as well. And all the asavas that you mentioned are built upon self-identity. So this is how silent illumination leads to awakening, is it directly drops the basis of self-identity. So the objects and processes which we build our sense of self on, by dropping those sankharas, as well as all other sankharas, then you eliminate asmimana, so the concept of self-existence. You directly destroy avijja, and with it, all the asavas go as well. So this is at the highest stage of silent illumination. Most of one's practice in silent illumination is at a much lower stage of just trying to drop whatever objects are appearing in the mind. But in time, it becomes deeper and deeper and deeper. Then Hayden says, I had no idea there were so many ways to interrupt paticca samuppada. Yeah, this is one of the wonderful things about getting many different teachings on one topic, is by getting many different angles, many different ways of thinking about and approaching a topic, then you can get a much deeper understanding of the topic, but also many different strategies for how to use the topic in your Dhamma practice. And I think this is especially important with things like paticca samuppada, where there are so many different interpretations and concepts around it. So you just do the best you can to try to find many different angles so that you can find a way that you can use it, you can understand it in your own practice. And that's the end of the questions. So I think we can go ahead and end for the evening. So thank you all for your participation and your questions. Please continue joining in with our live streams, and we can end the evening with, we have one more question. So Celestino says, if the mind's natural state is peace, then any thought that is or comes in the mind without being invited is like an enemy that needs to be known in order to see it coming and to stop it in the future. What is your view, Bhante? Yeah, I don't agree, to be perfectly honest. To say the mind's natural state is peace, it can be a true statement, but you need to be careful in saying that. And also, I would not say that thoughts that come into the mind are enemies. They're simply objects floating through the mind. It's like saying a cloud is an enemy of the sky. It's not. It's just a cloud floating through the sky. It's only a problem if we choose to see it as a problem. Otherwise, it's just a cloud floating through the sky. So in the same way, thoughts floating through the mind, well, those are just thoughts floating through the mind. There isn't necessarily anything wrong there. So just see it as what it is, to see it as something impermanent and impersonal, and therefore uninteresting, not relevant, not significant. So you can just let it come, let it go. Let it pass right through the mind, and there's no problem. Rick asks, can you share a few practical examples from your practice, how you were able to break free from mindlessly flowing along in the 12 links of dependent origination? I think I did that sufficiently in the talk. I'm pretty sure in the talk I gave a pretty clear description of how to practice with each of these links. And now we're once again to the end of the questions. So unless something else appears in the next few moments, we can go ahead and end for the evening with 3 sadhus. So please bring your hands into Anjali and chant sadhu 3 times. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.